Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of TA with MK. My name is Howard. I am MK's twin brother that is slightly better looking with the shorter hair and the trimmed beard. Just kidding. No, actually, I go to my mom's house every Sunday. It's a Sunday tradition. We go there for lunch. And you know what? Summer's fast approaching. The weather's getting warmer, so it was time to cut the old do a bit. Some of the locks off and, have a summer haircut. So that's what we got going on. Now, in today's video, we're going to discuss a little bit of Bitcoin dominance, kind of how I chart that on a weekly scale, what we can kind of expect depending on what it does, plan A and plan B for altcoins over the next little bit. I think we all kind of know that we're in a bear market. We don't know yet if we're in the bear market that's going to see price just go down for the next year or two, or if we're just in a pullback, but ultimately we're in a bear market. It depends on your definition of a bear market, but clearly we've been in a downtrend for many months. And so, I mean, what other definition could you come up with for bear market, right? But we're going to discuss Bitcoin dominance, kind of what I see for potential options for Bitcoin over the coming days and weeks, and kind of what our overall strategy or plan will be based on that. Now, if you guys are liking the content, please remember to like and subscribe, and let's go. It's TA with MK. It's TA with MK. Alright, now we will quickly discuss the SPX, and this is the 4-hour chart. Obviously, it's pertinent that we quickly discuss it, because we do know that whatever it decides to do will ultimately, at least in the short term, determine what Bitcoin will do, and the long term. It just always determines what it does. But what I mean is if we're coming up with a plan A and a plan B, you can't start with that plan without at least acknowledging that the SPX is going to be the driver, right? Now, we mentioned in Friday's video that it had lost the key level of support right here, right? This level that we were looking for a double bottom. But then it regained it with a bullish close. The last couple hours of the day, S&P 500 pumped, right? So then we wondered, hey, is this going to be potentially a bear trap? Which means a bear trap would essentially be any time, I wouldn't call this a major level, but a level of support is lost, right? And you're looking for the bearish retest to go short. What's considered a bear trap is if it loses that level, then regains it, bullish retest, and starts heading higher. Then you look at that little move to the downside, or in this case, this move, as a bear trap. What confirms that in some ways is just the, price action the next day, which because it was Friday, we had to wait till today. So the weekend wound up being relatively boring, but because that closed bullish, we did have a little bit more of a bias, I mentioned in my last video, for Bitcoin to trend up over the weekend, but I did say it would probably wind up Sunday night or Monday morning right back where it started, and essentially that's what it did. It did take a few more hours. It wasn't really Monday morning here in the US when it did retrace back down to like 29,200 to 500 area. But that's where it's at now, and that was what I expected. So, I didn't make a prediction because I basically had said whatever it does, whether it's to the downside or the upside, that it will just retrace that move and end up right back where it started. Well, because the SPX today was going up, obviously Bitcoin started out looking okay, but then oddly it went down, which to me was it just closing its CME gap. I'm not going to discuss that. I've never actually have discussed the CME gaps on my videos to this point. I will at some point in the future. If that's a new term to you, I would like to educate you on that at some point. However, I'm not going to worry about that, but essentially a CME gap is just where price closed on the weekend when the traditional markets closed. What was Bitcoin's price at that point? And then when it opened today, Monday morning in the United States, where was Bitcoin's price at then, and what is the gap there? So for example, Bitcoin, let's just say, closed the weekend Friday at 29,500. Let's just say that, for example. Well, then Monday morning comes around and Bitcoin's at 30,500, $1,000 difference. The gap is down there at 29. For that gap to be filled, it's going to be that it needs to go back down to that 29,500 essentially, right? And there's a little more to it than that, and that wasn't the best explanation. But again, we'll discuss that in a future video. But that didn't really surprise me that Bitcoin, even though the SPX was just chilling, that it decided to retrace, especially because it is at resistance. So now what we're looking for as far as plan A and plan B, before I decide to go at all on any sort of a midterm hold of anything, is we need this to break out of this falling wedge on the 4-hour here, and then also retest some level of support resistance. In this case, this would be a good level for me if it were to break out, retest and head higher. I would also be okay, as far as maybe even better, honestly, for better entries, would be that this retraces somewhere back down to here, flips this area as support, which would also be a low and a higher low, then breaks out, retests, and starts to trend higher. At that point, there would be a little more bullish sentiment as far as the SPX goes, because you would be, you know, obviously putting in a higher low, you'd be breaking out of this long downtrend of a falling wedge, and so on and so forth. Now, again, before I move on over to Bitcoin dominance and discuss my exact strategy as far as altcoin trading over the coming days to weeks, let's also quickly update Bitcoin. Obviously, again, it's just going to follow what the SPX does. SPX closed at resistance. One of the things you first learn in trading, and it's very commonly heard, is you don't long resistance and you don't short support, right? Like, you know, Bitcoin could literally retrace down 20%, but if it's at a level of support, you know, and you decide to short at that point, you're setting yourself up for failure because it's more likely going to bounce, and vice versa. In this case, the SPX is going to drive Bitcoin. I wouldn't imagine there's too many people right now wanting to long Bitcoin while SPX is at resistance. However, you know, you can wait and see what it does. You could short it if anything, you know, roll the dice there. It had a good day, but it's at resistance. You know, let's short it and hope that works out. But ultimately, Bitcoin is ranging. So I think we're still in a waiting game. I know, as boring as that sounds, unless you're trading short-term time frames, which I am, but I don't really discuss it in my videos too much. But ultimately, if I were to just take this chart that I was, you know, tracking at one point, this falling wedge, broke to the upside, broke back into the pattern, so this was what's known as a bull trap, you know, but then it got back out of the pattern, so then this would be called a bear trap. You know, you can get yourself all caught up, and in the short-term time frames, you can make good trades based off this. But ultimately, what it comes down to is if we hit this little trash can down here on the bottom left and clean our chart up, we're just trading inside of a range. And what I mean by that is we could literally take this trend line here and just say, hey, this over here, essentially, this area anyways, is the top of our range, right? And then we can clone that trend line and say, okay, this is the bottom of our range. And range trading can also be a great way to trade, right? Essentially, you had this would be like your bull trap, right? Because it had got rejected here, support here. This broke above, so faked everyone out. A lot of people, you know, would have longed to this retest, hoping for price to trend higher, and then it trapped the longs, and that's why they call it a bear trap, or sorry, a bull trap. And then it went back down. Didn't go all the way down, but kind of the, you know, towards the bottom of the range, then the top of the range, rejection, bottom of the range. So I mean, really, until one side or the other is broken, you could just long support, sell resistance, or short resistance, right? So right now we're headed back down. We're kind of down in the same area where this last bounced. Are we going to roll over and test the bottom of the range? You know, retest back down here at 28,600. I don't think we do tonight. It's possible though. Ultimately, what's going to happen is we're going to have to wait till the SPX opens tomorrow. If it has that little pullback I discussed before, you know, hopefully or potentially breaking out over the next day or two, that would be what would lead, you know, Bitcoin to probably come down here, maybe even at wicks lower. You know, obviously that would then, assuming it comes back up, be a bear trap, you know, because people tend to get emotional when Bitcoin, especially if you are trading on short-term time frames, but you're not super experienced. Every time it gets to the top, you should be thinking short, right? Some people get a little too excited. They try to front run what they think is going to be a breakout, and vice versa. Bitcoin has a massive drop of, you know, several percent over the course of a, you know, hour period. It gets down here and everyone starts wanting to go short at the exact wrong time. So at any rate, we're just trading in a range, which is very boring unless you have the patience to trade the ranges, right? Again, short resistance, long support, short resistance, and you take your profits in half, or, you know, or percentages as you get to the middle of the range. You can even take 25% at, you know, these mid-range, or we won't call it mid-range. Mid-range is the middle, but, you know, you can break the range up into 4 sections and say, if I'm shorting here, I could take 25% profits, and so on and so forth. And this is also another concept I'll discuss in a future video, but I just wanted to basically bring up that Bitcoin is being boring. And that's that. So there you go. Now, when Bitcoin is being boring, that's often the best time to come up with your plan, because you know Bitcoin can only stay boring for so long, right? It's going to eventually have an impulse wave one way or the other. It's more of a matter of when, not if, right? Even in a bear market, Bitcoin can have some pretty crazy rallies, and we just saw a week ago or so, or what was this is Bitcoin dominance, but a week or so ago we had the dump, right? So I mean, essentially, we're just waiting for its next move to get some more mid-term, or I guess you could say short-term still, but just trades that we can actually hold on to for a day or two, rather than just staring at 5-minute charts like I discussed in my previous video. So this is the Bitcoin weekly chart, and I brought this up with line on. Often if I'm charting a coin on this high of a time frame, you know, monthly, weekly, sometimes I even do this on the daily, especially like the 3-day, I will turn the line on just because it gives you a better idea of where price action closed. the candles, because if you have candles on, the difference between line and candles is just you don't get the wicks on line, right? Like you could see, for example, that these two candles here, the bodies ended up right here, right? The wicks clear up here. Whereas when I turn the line on, you're not going to see those wicks anymore. You're just going to see where it closed. Sometimes that gives you a better idea on these higher time frames of significant areas. And then what I like to do sometimes as well, I don't always show this on my charts I post in group or on my channel, but it's something I do personally, and I think it's a good idea to learn, is that on these high time frames, like weekly, this is Bitcoin dominance. I don't know why this just says Bitcoin, but anyway, on this chart of Bitcoin dominance, my blue lines for me represent strong levels of support or resistance on a weekly time frame. So that's 3+ touches. So for example, down here, this was resistance twice, this area right here anyway, and then down here support, right? That this is kind of what ended up being the end of our biggest, this was our biggest altcoin season back April of last year. But our last one we had this is basically where it ended. It caught this major level of previous resistance, and then support. So that's what I mark in blue as areas on a weekly. Then I went into like the 3-day, and that's what my orange are, is areas that had 3 more touches on the 3-day. And then my green is, my green was just a significant daily one. And so when it comes to my plan A, plan B as far as altcoins go, I'm also looking at this, you could call this just a falling channel, just a falling wedge or a channel, right? And I broke it up into 4 pieces. Essentially, you've kind of got this top where it had resistance, 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 right? 1, 2, 3 times. Very bottom down here, you had support, support, support. So ultimately, that's what makes up the channel. We've recently broke above it. Now, the top didn't have a ton of touches recently. They're all back here, so it's not like that top trend line's so valid. But in a sense, it is, because it broke above that trend line, and also this on the 3-day, this orange line is support. So, as we zoom in and look at it a little closer, essentially we got rejected at daily resistance. Now, keep in mind that daily is not as strong as 3-day, 3-day is not as strong as weekly, right? So that's why I do different colors, is to kind of know when I'm zoomed in what I'm at. Am I at a level that's really that significant in a long-term sense? Like, is this a weekly, support or resistance? So it made sense that in the short term, because it is resistance on the daily, which if we zoomed in means it had 2 or more touches on the daily, it got rejected. However, can we really expect a great move out of altcoins when it's just headed back to what's even stronger support? For 2 reasons now, because it may be flipping this trend line of support, as well as that level of previous resistance will now become future support. So we're going to zoom in and kind of give you a little bit more insight as to what I'm thinking. But overall, this is a very bullish, it's a bullish pattern. And bullish pattern because it has a 68% chance of breaking to the upside, which it now has. And, so at this point, that may just be the beginning of the move. However, in the short term, as we zoom in, we may be able to come up with a plan of, trading things to the upside, or if it was to, break resistance that's above us, shorting things essentially. Because as we know, if Bitcoin dominance is going up, that is bad for altcoins, and if it's going down, that is generally good. All right, so we've turned candles back on and we've zoomed into the daily. Now on the daily, I no longer pay attention to these trend lines that I had drawn, because as you can see, they just don't line up the same. Those were drawn with line on and on the weekly, right? So it's completely different than what we're looking at now. So now that I'm zoomed in, I'm only paying attention to my support and resistance levels that I made based on the zoomed out chart, right? So here's what I'm looking at. To me, it makes complete sense that we got rejected here, because this was a level of significance on the daily. So we broke up here, we got rejected. Well, now we're coming back down. The question is, plan A, plan B. It's almost inevitable that we're going to come back down and test at or near this orange line, right? You can kind of see back here, resistance here, support here, resistance all along here and here. Didn't quite reach here, but you can kind of look at this orange area as a zone of previous resistance, but we broke above it now, so will it become future support? So here's plan A. Plan A is we come down and we retest this, and we start putting in some sort of a bullish pattern that looks like consolidation or potentially a bounce, right? Higher, we'll zoom into the lower time frames, like the 4-hour or the 1 hour, and we'll start looking for double bottoms or higher lows, right? And if this starts to look like it's flipping as support, at that point, I'm watching Bitcoin for any move it makes to the upside, and I'm looking to short coins, because if this starts to trend higher, then we're at least going to want to short coins back up to this green zone again. Doesn't mean it'll break through it. It could double top at that point and retrace again. Maybe it just ranges for a while between that, resistance and this support, but that would be our short-term plan. plan A part 2, so still plan A, would be that we're shorting things, right? And we take some profits here, but not all profits. And if it does actually break above this, retest, and now we're trending higher, well, then we definitely, you know, continue to short things until we reach this blue level at around 40, almost 7%, which is weekly resistance. It'll definitely, should, you know, essentially have a hard time the first try breaking through this because it's a stronger area of resistance. Plan B, which if you're a, you know, a perma bull or wanting to long some coins or accumulate some coins, you want to wait until this level breaks, if it breaks. If it breaks, the issue is it's more than just a level, because again, on the weekly, we'd almost rather see this trend line. You know, we want to break back into this pattern, right? So if it breaks this level and, you know, bearish retests, you're not going to get a very big range there to trade in before it could flip right back up on you, right? So really, we need to break and lose this area more back here at about 44%, actually a little bit less, we'll say 43.5. If we lose that in bearish retest, well, at that point, you'd expect us to trend back down to at least this orange level of support, right? So plan A, plan B. We're either going to be shorting coins or longing coins. If you're not part of my Telegram group yet, there is a link in the description. Look for that. Join us. We can kind of give these call outs as they happen. That way, in real time, you can trade or have, you know, see how we're reacting to plan A and plan B. You could also follow me on Twitter. I have that link in the description as well. And, you know, that is all for this segment. A little bit of a longer one today, and I mentioned in a previous video that going forward I'm going to put a little more focus on just tutorial videos, learning, strategy videos. Once or twice a week I will put out a video that's kind of updating you guys on my midterm plans, areas I'm looking for to accumulate, time frames I'm looking to accumulate, and so forth. And then tomorrow is actually where I'm going to put out that first video that is discussing my plan, my strategy for the upcoming months and actually the rest of this year, based on certain price levels I'll be eyeing and time frames I'll be eyeing. So that'll be something to look forward to tomorrow. If you guys are liking the content, please do me a favor and remember to like and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow. It's TAwithMMK.